Deconverted Man here, and I've got Tavo.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
All right, and you were on Sean's channel, and you talked to him, and I don't know, you irritated Pelagia apparently, and so now you're here. You've sunk to this level.
No,
But
you've got a great channel. It's out of all the channels I'm subscribed to that are like in this genre of like theological, philosophical commentary. Yours is maybe the most, or at least one of the most entertaining.
oh, thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, the kids are all right, so I can see for miles here, and I'm wondering if you're familiar with either of those things. The kids,
The kids are all right. That's like a punk rock song?
it's a movie, and I
Oh,
can
okay,
see
I've
for
got you.
miles is the song. See, I figured that
I
you
can
would
see for
be,
miles and miles.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I figured you'd be familiar with it because it's the Who, and
The Who, yes,
and
yes,
you're
yeah.
an owl, so you know
Yeah. Yeah.
the Who. Okay, that's it. That's it. Good night, everybody. No, no. All right. Bad jokes aside, somebody got that. Now my brother will get it later. But yeah, you usually do kind of like an interview thing for theists at times, but we kind of talk, or I don't know. We'll figure it out. You know, because it's very professional on my channel. But so I was poking around your channel, and I poked you an email and got some great insights into some of your ideas there. Um, but I'm still not sure exactly what version of theist you are. So maybe we could start there. Like what uh, what religion or sect of religion or whatever, if any, do you have? Or
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Some people have argued on my channel that I should really call myself a deist rather than a theist. Now, the reason why I don't why I just prefer to call myself a theist is because, I kind of think of the deist as the cosmic watchmaker model. And I think of a theological perspective as more that, maybe not interventionist, but at least there's a little bit more proactivity in our universe, and so I guess I'm probably better classified as a theist. But I generally sort of think if there is a God, that God is omnitemporal. So whether or not God would intervene at the beginning of the universe versus at some time point within the universe's history, it would be completely opaque to those of us who are in the universe because we're experiencing time in a linear way. So I guess if there's an omnitemporal God, then to me, deism and theism are. This is not entirely philosophically accurate, but yeah. Now, I should say that I generally like to talk about conclusions and evidence and points of consensus between different theological beliefs and theological arguments. So I try not to make the conversation as much about my beliefs. But if you wanted to ask me more questions, I'm totally open to that because that's something I haven't really talked about that much on the channel. So, but I would say basically roughly, I'm sort of roughly inclined. I have a proclivity towards like a theistic worldview of the universe.
but no Pacific religion then, or
That's a good question. So as I told Sheng in his debate, which was really fantastic, with it, I hope people check out his channel as well.
link to the
But
description.
oh, dope. Okay, cool, yeah. We talked about this, and I think I'm fairly confident that out of all the existing world religions, that I think the theology of Christianity, or I should say the theology based on Jesus, is the most plausible. I mean, some people like, Thomas Jefferson, Nietzsche, a lot of other people have voiced that, Christianity is really like sort of a contortion of what the original theological messages of Jesus were. One of my favorite quotes about Christianity is from Nietzsche, who said, "There was really only ever one Christian who existed, and it was Jesus." So I don't generally like. I generally like to say I really like the teachings of Jesus. I really think they're really fascinating and they're really solid teachings. I don't know if that really puts me in the category of a Christian. And I've had several Christians comment on my videos and say, your beliefs are so different than what my standards are for Christian. They'll say, this is my definition of Christian, that you should not identify yourself as a Christian. So
Nah, the
generally, I try to be respectful of that and try not
the
to expropriate that label.
the good old no true Christian fallacy. That's very funny.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like whatever the label is, it's like it's not trademarked or reserved. So whatever you say your label is, that's your label. Um, I mean, it's tricky for religion because we kind of want to like pin that down a little bit. Like, are you new age into crystals, or whatever? We want to know because it's like, okay, well, what level of woo is this person, so to speak.
Sure, sure. And I also like, I was an atheist for most of my adult
Mm,
life. And as I told Shang, like I'm about 53% certain that there is a God,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm about 60% certain that if there is a God, Jesus had probably some degree of divine authority.
yeah. My knee jerk reaction to that is appeal to meaningless statistics because it's like these percentages. Like, well, how do you figure that out? Like, what's the mathematics? And it's more of a, I would suppose it's a subjective sort of personal evaluation you're doing that you're kind of trying to explain what that is to the other person more than it being actual math that you've done.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally true. And I would say it's slightly more real when I sort of think of it on a day-to-day basis. So if I say, well, I was 60% and now I'm like 58%, that's like a real change. Like I'm not as certain now. But yeah, in terms of like degree of certainty, giving a percentage is totally meaningless. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So, usually with my interviews, I kind of go into the history of the person, like if they grew up with religion, um, and what that was like. I don't know if you wanted to go there, if you just like, because you were saying, well, it's like interview or talk. You're like, let's do a talk or something, and I'm like, okay, we'll do both and see what sticks. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what exactly is going to get the best meat here. I suppose I want to ask. Um, I do want to know the bit of the history because I want to understand. If you were exposed to God, as a young person, that it might have influenced you, or if not, then where did this come in? How did that happen?
Yeah, good. Yeah, sure. As a youth, I was brought up, as a believer in a religion. I don't like to talk about this because my uh, my father was a very religious person. He passed away some years ago, and I can't talk about the religion that I was brought up without doing it somewhat disrespectfully, and so I try not to do that too much on my channel. But that's just out of respect for my father, and but I will say that it was the idea of hell that just basically made me an eight. I think I was about 9 or 10 years old when I was like, "There's no way that God would put us in a chamber of intense, unimaginable suffering for all eternity." Period. I just kind of gave up on religion when I was very young, just because of that alone. Now, I was an atheist for a long time after that, and I feel like when I was about 9 or 10, I was like, I don't really believe in this anymore. And then and here's something mildly interesting that I don't talk about a lot on my channel. I was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and this is now going back about maybe 10 years. And after that diagnosis, and I was an atheist throughout that whole experience. And then I went home from the hospital essentially on hospice to die. And when I went through that experience, it was like, there's no atheists in foxholes. I was actually an atheist, and I was fine with that. And I was like, what's going to happen after I die? It's going to be darkness. I won't exist. That's the end of it. And I was very, very comfortable with that. And it wasn't until a few years after that experience that I was like, I should at least try to see if there's more stuff to life. And then I read the Guru Granth Sahib of Sikhism, which I really like. I read the Kitab Iaqtas of the Baha'i Faith, which also I really am very fond of. I reread the Quran. I read the Book of Mormon. I did give it a fair shake. I actually kind of gave Scientology a pretty reasonable chance. And then I wasn't really interested in reading the New Testament just because I felt like casually I had had enough exposure to it and actually, for quite a bit of my time as an atheist, I was looking into the historical Jesus, and I was getting kind of turned on to the lectures of Richard Carrier. So I was actually a mythicist for a long time. It wasn't until I had been an atheist for several years that I actually just stopped being a mythicist, and I sort of agreed that there was a historical Jesus. But anyways, that's probably too long an answer. So if you
No,
want
no,
to,
no. The longer the better. I think interested in information and information gathering, so I understand, to some extent where you're coming from. The it with some. I don't know if you would classify yourself apologist per se, as kind of trying to figure that out on your channel as well. And I don't know if what you're doing, I don't know exactly what you are doing, to be fair. But, you'll hear, I was an atheist I'm used to, that I've gotten to know over years of doing YouTube, is people that are wanting a type of evidence for God that doesn't appear to exist. So that I have to conclude to some extent that that's not the sort of atheist you were. You didn't believe in God, but there was just something interesting about this thing God that for whatever reason attracted you to it.
Not really, honestly. I was a full-on atheist, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, you weren't." The two responses that I've gotten that have been sort of negative about me claiming that I was an atheist in the past have been, number one, you weren't really a real atheist, which I find to
the
be
no
really
true atheist fallacy,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Because then, like, I talked to so many people who are atheists who were Christians, and their biggest gripe, and it sounds cringy to me as well, is when they get told you were never a real Christian.
Right.
So,
Because
but
there is this type of atheist that I have known online where we're wanting evidence, and what that means seems to me to be very consistent across the board. It's the same sort of evidence that we have for anything else in life. That it's like you'll hear look at the trees. Well, we've looked at the trees, we've looked at everything, and
sure, yeah.
we see the trees, we see the walls in our house. We see our hands, we see
Look
our
at the
microphones.
eyeball. Look at the
We
kidneys,
and that's, we don't see God there. Whatever this God is, it's not here to see it, and so we're lacking empirical evidence of it. So is there any test that we can perform on it? And the answer seems to be no. So that's it for most atheists. It's like, until I have that, I'm not convinced of it. And that doesn't present itself for whatever reasons.
Yeah, I mean, so here's really what kind of tipped the scale to me. And I wouldn't say that this moment made me believe in God, but it made me consider that the universe might be purposeful. So, which is a slightly different idea, but that at least sent me a little bit on a bit of a more spiritual search. And it was actually kind of a nerdy story, but it's the black hole theory wars. Do you know about this? This was a debate between Stephen Hawking and Leonard Susskind about what happens when you toss something into a black hole. Now, this is not something that is theologically relevant. I've never heard a Christian apologist talk about this, but this is what did it for me, to be honest. So, are you familiar with this debate, or I could give you a brief recap?
I mean, I know they've talked about black holes, and I know different things that have been said to some extent, but I don't know what you're referring to precisely. So go ahead.
Okay, so there was this debate. It's really, really fascinating. And if anyone is listening to this debate and to this conversation, and you're interested in hearing more about this debate, it was Leonard Susskind wrote a book about this. and it's called I think it's just called the Black Hole Theory Wars. And it was his debate with Stephen Hawking about what happens when you toss something into a black hole, right? And Stephen Hawking was arguing that once you toss something into a black hole, it's gone, it disappears from the universe forever. And Leonard Susskind and Gerard de Tooft, really great physicists, both of them as well, they argued that that's not what happens. When you toss something into a black hole, the event horizon of the black hole keeps that as it turns it into information, and that information is never erased from the event horizon of a black hole, right? Now, the interesting thing is the universe has the same rules as a black hole in terms of the inner space of within the event horizon, and there's even some thought that maybe our entire universe is just inside of a black hole. But so, in other words, if I take like a sandwich and I toss it into a black hole, you might think that sandwich has now disappeared from reality, essentially. And in a way, it has. But in another way, there's this very interesting thing where it becomes part of the information on the event horizon of the black hole. And that information can never be erased. So they actually formulated a law of physics that emerged from this debate that had never really been described. But that law is called the -1 law of thermodynamics because it's so fundamental. It's basically, we have a zero law for a second, etc. So this is the -1 law of thermodynamics. And it's that information cannot be erased. So, that was interesting to me. And I think that set me on a path of like, what if the universe is purposeful? Right. And it wasn't so much my search for, is there a God, with a capital G and a sky daddy and a big guy with a long beard. It was really more a question of, what if there is purposefulness to the universe? Is that something that I was missing? What if the narratives of who we are don't get lost? Now, to me, from a humanistic perspective, we sort of look at ourselves as really infinitesimal beings that are so fleeting, that are so ephemeral, that we can't really matter to the universe. But when you start looking at information patterns on the event horizon of a black hole as a model for our universe, you see there's sort of ways that the information, the ways that we influence the universe are sort of trapped. And let me just explain this in one more mathematical way. If you map particles, on Mars, and you map the average interparticulate relationship in like sediment on Mars, not much is going to happen, right? Now, in other words, if you start plotting world lines, those world lines will be very, very slow arcs. So if you do the same thing on Earth, you're going to get a very different set of world lines because you're going to see that some matter moves around more in less predictable ways because humans, like, we pick up bricks and we turn them into buildings and stuff like that. So in other words, if you analogize the universe as a black hole and you analogize the information in the universe as the information on an event horizon of a black hole, you start seeing different ways of depicting the data that underlies our existence. And basically, my thinking was, after that, I was like, what if the universe has a memory, if that memory can't be erased, if the narratives of who we are in our lives can't be ever erased from the universe, what does that maybe hint to about the nature of the universe and our relationship in it? And does that perhaps mean that the universe is purposeful? Now, it's by no means proof, but my most convincing argument that I think you'll be most engaged in is the arguments around simulation theory. Now, I think simulation theory is an interesting argument for theism, and we can get into that. But just that's kind of like an overhead view of like why I started asking the question, not is there a God, but is the universe purposeful? And that was sort of a different, and that really sent me in a different direction than I had always sort of wondered a little bit if there's a God, but I was like, I don't think so. And if there is a God, it's nothing like what is, depicted in Abrahamic religions. But I would say, like, around after reading that paper by Susskind and Tuft, I was like, well, maybe the universe is more purposeful than I've considered previously. That's basically like a quick overview.
Yeah, well, what's meant by information, as far as I understand that, is is not necessarily what people tend to mean by information. It's not. It's just it's like sand dunes have information. Something like that, where if you were to play a giant record player over a giant record needle over sand dunes, you'd get noise, and that's information in a sense. And so that's kind of how I understand that type of information to be. Um, is that correct? Or are we thinking of this as different information?
No, I think that's one. The question is, here's the way Susskind explains it. Let's say I have a tub of water, right? And I have an ink dropper, right? And I'm going to drop the ink droplets into the water, right? And I'm going to do it in some sort of Morse code way, right? So I'll drop, 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 right? So I'm spacing out temporally how those drops hit the water, right? So you might then come into that room and look at the tub of water with a few ink drops in it and say, that information, what you did to this tub of water by putting ink in it, is totally lost, right? That ink is now diffused
Yeah,
around.
entropied. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so what Susskind says, and to my understanding, this is really the way most physicists now regard this, is that information is actually still there. It's computationally extremely difficult to get it back out. But theoretically, if you have the computational strength, that information still exists within that universe.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, anyways, it was just sort of interesting.
Yeah.
What
For
that
what?
means that, like, if I give somebody a sandwich, or if I steal a sandwich from a grocery store, that sort of made me think that those actions are in some way recorded into the fabric of reality, and that's really what started me on this search.
Hmm. I don't know why, but it brings to mind Star Trek Next Generation. I'm gonna go.
Which one? Yeah.
I'm gonna go down this path a little bit. There's. I'm trying to think what the episode's called. But Data meets somebody who's convinced that he puts his mind essentially into Data, and
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
but at first he's saying, well, no, no, and so then he's taken out of data and put into the computer, and then he's just kind of stored there, and uh, it's just information. And then there was a different episode with Data where Bruce Maddox scores Measure of a Man.
Measure of a Man, great episode,
Yeah,
great episode.
yeah, and Bruce Maddox says, I'm gonna, take you, and I'm gonna put you back you up. Basically, I'm going to make a backup copy of Data. And he's like, well, I'm sure you could do that, which is very highly respectful of Data to say that he could do that, because I don't think he could. But and he's like, but it would be lost. Basically, Data's talking about qualia.
Qualia, absolutely, yeah.
The qualia would be lost and just reduced to information. And he said, he gives the example of poker and how he read all about it, but then playing it was different than reading about it. That it had a different qualia, even though that word's never used in the episode. And I go, well, we're just all stored in this informational way. Well, that doesn't help me. My qualia is not there to know. So it's nice, but it doesn't, it doesn't do anything for me. In the same way, my atoms and molecules will continue to exist for quite some time after I'm gone, but they don't know that they are me or were me or part of me. And even now, as we speak, pieces of me are flying off and going into dust, and eventually I'll become part of you, you'll become a part of me, we're all part of each other in that real way that is scientific. But we're not aware of any of that because it's just molecules. So I don't know that why that would be on a higher scale. That it's nice to know that we'll be remembered by the black holes that suck us up, if they suck us up, but that doesn't really give us any sort of anything more to that. I mean, it's interesting as an idea, but I don't see why that makes it anything more than something that might be interesting to know. Like, okay, we'll be remembered by a universe that doesn't know anything because it doesn't have a mind. Cool. There will be a record of us, though. you know. So I don't know. I guess this search for meaning then, did you then kind of anthropomorphize this and say, well, now God or now the universe has a record, so maybe there's more to it than just it being a record, I mean, after all, I mean, who cares? It's just a record. I mean, maybe somebody's there to look at it. Now it kind of matters because they can read through the record and that sort of poetic sort of metaphor.
Yeah, I would say this is several steps before what I would call evidence that sort of points towards a theistic worldview. So it was at least interesting to me, and it sort of like started me off on my search of like, what if we matter to the universe? Is the kind of question that I was asking. Now, again, this is several steps below what I would consider to be like my more, here's proof that there is a God. And again, I wouldn't say that I have that proof. I think one of the more convincing and one of the more under-recognized arguments is simulation theory. But I don't know that that really is going to convince anyone beyond a doubt. And I don't know that it's convinced me beyond a doubt. It's like I said, it's sort of pushed me above the threshold where I think it's more than 50% likely that the universe is purposeful. And I don't know. To me, that was sort of a more interesting question. Here's just another thought experiment. Let's say I get an email from somebody that I implicitly trust, and their email says there is a God. I figured this out, and I say, well, I trust everything you say implicitly, so I'll always trust what you say. So the next day, would I live my life in any different way? And I think the answer is no. But I think asking the question of like, the universe does have a purpose. More than what we perceive is maybe a slightly more interesting question to me, and it does have theological and theistic implications, even if it doesn't necessarily prove that there is a theistic or theological entity. Now, again, I'm happy to like if you want to switch gears and go into the simulation theory argument. I think it's kind of interesting. I did make a video about this. It was one of my first videos, and it didn't get super popular. But I think it's an argument that you may find at least a little bit interesting.
Well, I kind of wanted to probe this a bit more. I know you sent me these slides here. We want to use those at some point, hopefully. But it seems like there's a lot of anthropomorphizing work that's being done here to get to this conclusion at all. That even if it's true that a black hole or the whole universe is like a black hole or whatever, and that it's going to remember all this stuff that we did, even the sandwich that you ate 5 years ago, that's there somewhere. That how does that then transition to it matters to the universe? The universe is not a thing that has in any consciousness as far as we can detect or know about, at any rate.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I guess the way I think of it is, if I'm simply, I kind of feel like once you die, you're going to be remembered for maybe a few months, a few years, and then after that, not many people are going to think about you. And pretty soon those people will be dead, and then it'll be as though you never existed. So certainly that if that's all we have, I think it's a very convincing case that we don't really matter, right? Now, your argument is like, if you've decided that's not the case and we do somehow matter, does that really prove that we matter? And it absolutely does not. I think it just proves that the argument that we don't matter is not as definitive as I thought. But you're right; it does not lead me to a point where I'm like, okay, therefore there's a God. That involves a lot more anthropomorphization. So which I try not to do, because we are, as humans, certainly very prone to anthropomorphize other entities that are not human. So but I at least think that in my worldview, thinking that I'm not just going to disappear and that's the end of my story, it was at least a disproof of what to me was a very compelling argument for atheism. Not to say that atheism is still is disproven because of that. It just disproves one argument for atheism in my mind. And
Well,
again, that even that is a stretch, reasonable.
I'm gonna borrow a question I have in my book, Caught Between an Infinite Hope, Find a Despair, available on Amazon, which is this: you must choose. There's a God, but no afterlife. There's an afterlife, but no God. What do you choose and why?
Oh, wow, that is a good question. And this is not like what is your belief. This is which would
No.
you choose if
Yeah,
so
which
if,
do you
if I have a
choose? You
switch
have
to
to
flip
choose.
and
It's
that
a thought,
controls the universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. No afterlife for anyone.
Yeah, there's a God, but there's no afterlife, or there's an afterlife, but there's no God, and that's just the way the universe works, the way reality is.
Um, I mean, I guess I would choose. I think I would choose God and no afterlife.
Interesting. Why?
Yeah.
Why would that be?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think I have a friend who's I admire him greatly, and he's such a wonderful person. He does so much charitable work, and he's such a good person. And he's a devout Christian, and he's like, when we die, we're gonna go to heaven, and we're gonna have a new body, and it's gonna be a physical body, and we're gonna be like living on a cloud and all. And I'm like, I could not. I don't know if like if you told me like, hey, Tavo, you're gonna live to be like 500 years old. I think that would be really, really difficult. If you told me, man, you're going to live to be for infinite years, you will continue to live as yourself, I'd be like, oh man, that's terrible. That does not sound appealing to me at all. Even if you're like, you're going to be in heaven, I'd be like, I can't imagine anything that would be very, a very interesting. Let's say you gave me every wish and you gave me like total omniscience, I mean omnipotence, and I could do anything I want and eternal life. I don't know that I would take that deal, because even if you can have anything you want, I think like an infinite amount of time, that's like anyway, so that's
Yeah,
why I don't
you'd run out of stuff to do.
you'd run out of stuff to do and yeah, I mean
That's why the solution. I don't know if you ever watched the show. I've talked about it before. The Good Place. Um, it's this show about
Oh yeah, yeah, great
yeah,
show, great show.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know the show. I've never seen an episode of it, but I like
Oh, okay.
I Wikipedia
Yeah,
the
hey,
plot
you
once.
get. Oh, well, yeah, you gotta.
Yeah,
It's worth a watch, but the spoiler.
I know the rough plot. It's
Yeah,
a
the
interesting. Yeah.
spoiling the end. Even though
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
yeah, spoiler alert. But I mean, it's still worth watching. But they come up with everyone in the afterlife is infinite, and they're bored. They're bored out of their minds. They've done everything they want to do, so they basically make an option that they can leave through this arch that will disintegrate them, and then they'll die for real. And they don't have to if they don't want to, but they now have the option, and that brings people joy knowing that it's there. And so many people choose to go, many people don't. So it's now the option is there. So that solves the afterlife's problem that was there. And I thought, that's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. Except I'm really pessimist, so I would want it to be like a button behind like 10 other buttons I have to push, and I have to like answer a quiz. I want it to be like
That's true.
really
Yeah,
convoluted. I'm like, just an arch so I can pass through. Somebody's gonna drag me through the arch, or I'm gonna sleepwalk through it, or something. But no, of course you have to ask Janet, which is their entity that's basically God, to bring you there, and then you're allowed to sit there for as long as you want and then go through. Or I guess you could say, well, I changed my mind, and she would take you back, happy as can be. So but I guess you're let me know if I'm wrong here on this, hypothesizing on what you might think, why God is like, well, you have a thing that's reading your book, if you will, the book of you. And so then, even though you're not there to enjoy it, that entity is enjoying that you had this existence. Is that a Did I get that right? Or
That's a nice. I don't know that that's my specific rationalization, but that's a really nice recapitulation of what I said. I really like that. That
yeah.
sounds great. I think
I'm
that's
just
fantastic. Yeah.
guessing at why you might pick that, but I don't know because it's your pick at the end. It's not meant for anyone else to comment on it. It's a thought experiment for the for the reader, for both believers and non. It's like, well, I rather have an afterlife. Yeah, well, I don't know, kind of afterlife, and then you're into all that. It's like, well, there's a God. I'd be like, oh, that's interesting, but there's no afterlife. What's the point of that? So I mean, it makes you know what you value most in a way, So there's that part of that too. Um,
Yeah, well, I don't think there's anything in the Bible necessarily, or the Quran, or any other religious book that talks about souls that I've read that says that souls are atomic. So I've had this conversation with, I mean, this is pretty esoteric, but like, how do we know that our souls are atomic? We don't really know the answer to that, you know?
what do you mean?
Oh, I just mean like, what if it's not a soul? What if it's soul stuff that can be sort of further dissolved into like bits of soul matter?
Oh yeah, that's now you're getting really deep and complicated, right, yeah, because like what's God made out of? How
Yeah,
does
yeah,
that
well,
right, how does
yeah.
that work? And it's like, well, these are questions that theism doesn't even attempt to answer. It's like, well, how where does God's power come? How does that work? Where does that come from? Why
Yeah.
is it
Oh.
why is it this God rather than a different God? The classical, why is there something rather than a thing? Like, oh, that God. Why is there God rather than no God? All right, right back to where we started now. And I like to ask the question. I was like, well, what even is God, and how would I know? How am I supposed to know what God is or isn't? And even if something says, oh, Q from Star Trek, that's God. Sure, why not? I mean, the word God doesn't matter to me. If it wants to be called God, I'll be like, all right, whatever, I don't care. But I don't know. So is there? Do you have any solution to that sort of question of how do you know what God is in the first place?
Well, I don't know if I have a solution, but I have two different insights. One insight is, and this is kind of important to my other sort of worldviews, and it's sort of relevant to the question that you asked me about an afterlife, is that, I think that we are kind of used to experiencing existence in linear time, right? And maybe that's not the way that it actually works outside of this universe. Almost certainly, it's not how it works. But so I mean, we tend to think of like just going back to your heaven and hell question, like an afterlife. We tend to think that there's still a clock on the wall, and that clock is still ticking forward. It's just ticking forward forever. There's still like a calendar, and so you can still tear days off. It's just that calendar goes off infinitely far into the future. And I think maybe it's just that time doesn't have the same meaning outside the universe. So when I say that there's like, if God is omnitemporal, then that means that God exists at all time points in addition to all of space, which we know has to be the case because of, Minkowski space time and everything, right? So I don't know if that answers the question maybe a little bit. Um, I do think that maybe just, if there is an entity that is God or is outside of the universe, then or an afterlife, then it's probably not in the way we think of it. It's probably not linear time. It's probably just time has a different meaning or doesn't have any meaning. In the words of that TV show, The Good Life, it's like time is measured in Jeremy Bearimy or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and then um, but the other thing that I was going to say is this kind of loops back towards simulation theory. But would we know the difference between God and like a Kardashev type 4 civilization? And I do have a slide on that coming up, but we can get to that in its due course or due time. But yeah, so if there is if there is a Kardashev 4 civilization, wouldn't that be indistinguishable from God? And if you believe that our universe is simulated, it's likely that you believe that that simulation has to arise from something that is at least a Kardashev 4 civilization. And if that's the case, then it stands to reason that that civilization would be, from our perspective, indistinguishable from God. And moreover, we wouldn't be able to sort of even comprehend what that sort of existence would be like for a Kardashev 4 civilization.
Yeah, and so that is one question that somebody posited my way at some point. It's like, well, humans, if we continue to be, we'll get smarter and smarter as time goes on, and we'll invent technologies, and we can make a simulation, and now we're effectively a god. So maybe there's a god of this universe. I'm like, well, yeah, and then you're just going back indefinitely with gods upon gods that may, and uh, it'd be interesting, I guess, if that's how reality is, but it's like, well, there's again, it's just speculation. It's not, what makes a thing God. You're just saying, well, it has to make the simulation or run the simulation. Well, why does that make a thing God? Well, do you have to run a simulation to be a god? Am I a god? Is lobster a god? What it's we humans that decided what God is or isn't in the first place. Uh, because again, as far as I can tell, and you let me know if you've got an insight to this that I don't. God doesn't tell us who's right or wrong, and it's very quiet. This God.
Divine hiddenness, I think it's a very persuasive argument. I think it's very hard for theists to get around the divine hiddenness argument in some form. It'd be nice if this God would have given us some hints. I think I think the divine hiddenness argument is compelling. It's interesting. I've talked to people for whom that argument doesn't really matter at all. I think there is maybe a little bit of poetry in the way that Jesus interacts with people versus people have sort of different experiences with the hiddenness of God. And this is not an argument that gets out of it. I'm just sort of pointing out like a little bit of a parallel. For instance, I know somebody that I voiced this issue with, and I was like, what do you say about divine hiddenness? And, this is a different person that I know who's Christian. And he was like, there is no divine hiddenness. If I want to talk to God, God is there anytime, and I know God's there, and I can feel God's presence. So I don't know what you're talking about, divine hiddenness. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And so I do think that there's sort of like this way that Jesus interacts with people, because you read the synoptic gospels, and God and Jesus is like, I'm the Son of Man, and this and that, and right. And then you read the Gospel of John, and Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. I'm the Father and I are one. So I think it's interesting. So, and then, the Sanhedrin comes up to Jesus and he says, you're just going to get the sign of Jonah, and that's all you're going to get. And, and some people come up to Jesus and he's like, he doesn't give them the time of day. And other people say, he's like, I'm God, I'm the Father. And other people, and this is again, operating under the assumption that any of these stories are historically true, which is, so I'm just using this as essentially like a literary example or a thought experiment. But anyways, just voicing the interesting observation that I think there's at least a parallel that for some people, divine hiddenness is very compelling. I've never, somebody. I will say, when I was a kid, we were very poor, and I was going through a very rough period, and my friend was like, he's very Christian, right? And he was like, bow down right now and invite the Holy Spirit to enter your life, and you will feel transformed. And I did that. I was like, okay, well, I'm having a hard time. Like, I'm ready for the Holy Spirit. And he was like, okay, Holy Spirit, enter this guy. And I shouldn't laugh. It was for him, it was a very solemn moment. And I didn't feel transformed at all, And so, that is an argument to me in favor of divine hiddenness. Like, why I was definitely very willing to feel something, and I didn't feel anything, so. And had I felt something, I don't know. I don't think that would be any proof for anyone else. It would be merely subjective proof through my own lens, which is obviously flawed. And first person evidence is not very good. But
all right. Well,
oh, interesting. A globe just popped up. Okay.
Yeah. Here we have a map, or one map of the Earth all stretched out and squished, because you can't draw 3D and 2D.
Sure, sure, yeah.
And you zoom in and you zoom in and you zoom in and you have to kind of go over here and then you zoom in some more and somewhere over there by that foot thing, that's where Jesus appeared for a few years to a limited amount of people in the history of humanity after billions of years, and hasn't appeared since, because that's God's way to interact with people.
How do you reconcile that? Yeah, yeah. It's a powerful argument.
Nope. Yeah. It's just like, no, that's a nothing. It's just, Hitchens said it better than I ever could. You had all these billions of years of death and people dying from their teeth and all this, and then God's like, oh, hi, here I am, hi guys, how's it going? And meanwhile, people are still dying. They don't know Jesus. They don't hear anything about him. People right outside of Jerusalem don't know about that. People right next door to the place don't know about him. And they live and they die, perhaps without even hearing the stories that he told. And so you have all these thousands of years where Christians have to slowly go out and tell the message that yeah, God stopped by to say hi to us. Well, that's great for you. He hasn't said anything to us. We were over here in India. We had God. He was an elephant. What are you talking about? So
Yeah.
God looks very human made in that scenario, and I don't see that as an interaction of God interacting with humans in any meaningful way. It's a story, but it's not one that I find compelling anymore as a skeptic. I used to. For a long time, I believed it, but there's no evidence for it. So why should I keep believing it? And there's no test for it. And there's no sound argument that I know about for it. Your ideas about simulation and all this are hypothetical in nature, rely on science and or perhaps pseudoscience, and seem anthropomorphic and don't settle the criteria of empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a sound argument. So I can't believe in them. You have your reasons to believe in them. I'm not really sure, other than this search for meaning that you went on, you decided, if you will, that there was a meaning, whereas I'm not convinced one way or the other. If there is any meaning I have is my own. And the universe didn't know about me before I existed, and it won't know about me after. So my existence matters to me and people that know me, and that's all that needs to be. And it doesn't have to be more than that.
I mean, look, I think those are all very, very compelling insights and very compelling arguments. I could list off counterpoints, but I mean, I think it's okay to just tell the audience that they should ruminate on the insights that you've just shared rather than immediate. But I'm happy to be like, well, here's what a theistic counter argument would be, and I'm happy to give you some of those counter arguments, but I don't know that they would be convincing for you.
No, because the only thing that would convince me is what I have is that criteria: empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a sound argument. And I became a skeptic precisely because those things aren't for God, as far as I can tell.
Well, I mean, this might be a good time to weave back in the simulation argument. We're already getting close to an hour, so if you want to save that for another day, that's cool.
We can show those.
It's kind of a bit of a longer argument, but I would say that there's several different arguments that you've kind of gone through. One argument is, why did God wait billions of years to show up? Right, like the universe went on just fine without God. One of the interesting insights about if you consider God as an omnitemporal entity is those billions of years from God's vantage point don't exist, right? It's in other words, if there is an omnitemporal being looking in at our universe from the outside, it's not like they have to wait billions of years. And this is true of any omnitemporal entity, if there is one outside of our universe. It wouldn't be that the flow of time would be linear for that entity, that they're waiting for humans to show up. It would be as though, every instant in time would be just as accessible to somebody outside of the universe as every point in space.
Yeah, I mean,
So
every instant of pain and suffering and horrible death that has ever occurred would be there all the time, and all the disgustingness of the universe would be there on display at all times. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there's, and that's another separate but also compelling argument. Like, how do you reconcile God with the existence of pain? I mean, I will say this: when I've had this conversation with a few people, I propose a thought experiment. Would you, let's say, we put a chip in your brain that allowed you to decrease the pain from any given stimulus, right? So, let's say you said, let's say somebody comes up to me and says, you're ugly, you look like a puppet, and I could instantly press a button, and all the negative feelings that I have in my like, I would still know what they said, but all those negative feelings would go away. Would you choose that? And I think most people would say, no, I want to experience reality in a way that's authentic. Now, that's not true of everyone. And maybe that doesn't mitigate the injustice of standing by and not interceding while people are experiencing pain. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about. In other words, has there ever been a moment of my life where I would have chosen a less authentic reality and less pain because of that? Now, if I can't make that choice, why would I want God to intercede to make that choice for me? I think it doesn't entirely disprove the argument, but it's at least an interesting counterpoint sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, why would this entity bother to do anything at all other than to watch it unfold, horrors and all? It's an amoral entity that doesn't care, obviously.
Well, I don't know that I would go that far. Like because if I say it's amoral and it doesn't care and it's not acting in a way that's benevolent, right?
Yeah.
What I'm really assuming is a decrease in my pain is what would be benevolent, right?
Sure.
But that's not necessarily true, right? I mean, because if I wouldn't want that decrease in pain, I mean, I've had some really painful episodes.
Well, the only reason why we have pain is, biological evolution. There are people born without the ability to register pain, and they have to be very careful because they could, get a cut and not even know, and perhaps die from that. So, and then there's people that are born without any feelings at all. So if you had a combination of both of that, you'd have a person that didn't have any feelings and didn't have any feelings. And that's perfectly understandable, biologically, evolution. Just, that's how they were born. And nothing is said that affects them, and nothing that happens affects them. Of course, they have to be careful because, they want to keep existing, presumably. And they have to fit into society, so they have to obey the laws, if nothing else. But nothing really affects them. And I don't know what it would be like to be that person. But, I mean, since they could exist, then we could all exist in that way. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, I think if your argument is I've proven that if there is an observer outside of our universe watching our pain, then that observer is amoral, then my counter argument to that is to say I don't think that I agree with that, because if I would not want a magic button to take away my pain, why would I want an entity that has the capacity to do that outside of me to act in that regard? In other words, I would say that wouldn't be a moral actor necessarily. In other words, if there's
because
a God
the pain is only necessary as a result of biological evolution.
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is
you could create a world where the person that, like I said, the person that is born without the ability to have pain receptors, they don't feel pain. I forget what the technical term is, but at any
Congenital insensitivity to pain, I think is,
yeah, something like that. And you also have somebody that's born, well, I don't know if psychopath or sociopath or whichever one is the term, but born without
sociopath. Yeah.
Yeah, born without emotion.
Yeah.
So like you can say, "Oh, you suck," and they're like, "Okay, whatever." It doesn't bother them. Nothing gives them pleasure or non-pleasure. They just don't have emotion. So that person's possible. So we could all be that, as far as this entity could make everybody and every creature be that way, so that there was no pain, there was no emotion, it's just existence. So why isn't the world like that? I don't know. Could have
Well,
done,
I guess the question is that an existence that you would prefer?
Doesn't matter what I prefer. It's just that's how it could be.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, let's engage in the thought experiment. Like, let's say you have the choice to live in a world without pain, right? Or in a world where you have no reaction to pain. In other words, you can sort of press a magic button and it
right. Well, if we're magic buttoning it, then I make it that not only is pain non-existent, but there's no things that would cause injury in a way that would kill somebody either, because you have to have both for it to make sense.
But would you want to live in that universe? I wouldn't want to live.
Why not?
Well, I personally wouldn't want to live a life that is that inauthentic. But that
that's the way that reality is, so it'd be authentic. Once reality is that way, that's how reality is.
I mean, I guess, yeah. I guess I wouldn't, but I don't think there's an advantage to living in that universe.
There's certainly no disadvantage.
Well, I think the disadvantage is, how can you contextualize pleasure if there's no such thing as pain?
You can still have pleasure without pain. You can get dopamine.
Well, that gets to an interesting argument, because, like, let's say you had like an AI that hooked up your brain to like produce like unending pleasurable sensations.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you had a rogue AI and your AI says, make every person happy, and so that AI enslaves humanity and makes our brains fire to make us unendingly happy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the problem is, if you say, well, I want to disconnect from the AI and just kind of go for a walk for a second, that disconnection would be insanely painful. It would be excruciating. So I think that shows that, and again, this is a very contrived thought experiment, but I don't know that you can, I think pleasure and pain exist on a spectrum, and I think there's
that's the way that the brain is set up. But if you're the one building the system, you don't have to set it up that way.
Well, I guess I don't know that that's true. I think if to experience a high, you have to be able to experience a low.
That's only because that's the way that our brains are, and not because it has to be, because it is. I mean, it's a result of biological evolution, not because if you're able to tinker with physics, you're able to build it from the scratch. You're the one deciding that pain will exist in the first place, or that the conditions that will make pain requirement for living will exist, because animals feel pain, and there's a deer caught in a fence somewhere that nobody knows about, suffering, it doesn't know why, and it just knows it's scared and slowly dying from thirst. And but at least it's recorded, so the universe will remember that moment, and the entity gets to watch it indefinitely forever. So, I mean, that's great.
No, it's I think, Alex O'Connor makes the point that it's somewhat easier to rationalize human suffering than it is to rationalize animal suffering. And I'll definitely grant to you that when you take the problem of pain and you deal with it separately intellectually, I think it's much easier to negate it. But when you put it in the context of, like, there is an animal, it's suffering right now, God can put that animal out of its suffering. He can help that animal, and he chooses not to do that. How do you justify that? I think that's a powerful argument. I think there's not
I'm not sure that you can do that with humans either. That it makes any sense for God not to do anything to intervene, because we intervene all the time with each other. So
we do
we actually care about each other. We want to prevent suffering and harm coming to others. We put out the fire. We get away from the volcano. We try to find out if there's going to be a volcano or hurricane. But these conditions don't have to exist. But unless the world is mechanical in nature, unless it is built not for us, but built by the mechanisms of the universe. Um, but you might as well, it's like you can look at it and say, well, everything was built for the lobsters. And certainly there's a book written by some genius that suggests this weird idea. But, it's like, oh, humans are just a byproduct. We're a secondary thought. The creature that matters is lobsters. That's why things are so bad for us humans. Well, there's stuff that's bad for the lobsters. No. That's just illusion. That's just there for the humans to throw them off. And it says so in the book.
Yeah.
It's all just a nice little rationalization you can make. Anyways, all right. So you want to get to these slides?
Well,
so I'll do that.
we're at an hour now.
Oh, I didn't even. Man, we'll have to do part 2. Man,
well,
all my fault.
Well, here, let me suggest something. Are we live streaming right now?
Yes.
Do you want to take any questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Why don't we take some questions?
They never know how to do that.
And then here's my other suggestion. We could stop the live stream and then pick it back up and then just record it and put that video up later if you want to do like a part 2 simulation theory. I don't know if that's something you'd be interested in.
I mean, I think.
But I'm happy to spend like a few minutes taking some questions from the audience.
I'm not the one necessarily to do that with. It's not my field, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay.
I can tell you if the argument is sound or not. I mean, that's my thing.
I don't want to go too much longer than an hour.
Yeah. But I mean, if you have an argument you want me to look at, I'll certainly do that.
Why don't we table that for now and see if there's any? Do you want to take any questions from the audience?
I'm looking for them now. Let's see. I just noticed that it was a nice little feature there, putting little question marks here. This is not a question to you. So hey guys in the audience. And girls,
there's a whole long chat. Wow.
Yeah. They were in their own universe while we were talking. They were
okay.
They were talking. That always happens. They talk to each other. They bring up Gordon Malley's sandwich. I don't know who this nerd is. He's a real nerd. He would have enjoyed the joke that I told about the kids are all right and all that. What was the other one I mentioned now? Damn it, I don't remember. But he would have liked that joke because the Who, he knows that group. He knows all that nerdy stuff. Anyways. Don't worry, this is my brother. I can call him a nerd.
Okay.
It's like, why are you insulting this guy? He's like, I can. That's my job. Okay, there we go. Here's a question. I don't know if it's directed to you, but we'll pretend like it is. So the same as what? The same as
the one day is 1,000 years to God stuff. Seems like the only way God can exist is if it's outside of time and space. Doesn't that seem rather convenient? That's a good question. I'm happy to answer that. You know what a filbert is, right? A filbert is a walnut. That's a name for walnuts in some countries. Filbert. Yeah, that doesn't really answer the question. But my
this is a way of saying that he's nuts. It's an attack on him, not the argument. No.
No.
That's what I'm talking
about. I think it's kind of basically what I'm saying is if God is omnitemporal and omnipresent, then there's two ways that could happen. God could imbue the entirety of the universe, or could be outside of the universe and within the universe at the same time. So that's how I would resolve that particular paradox. So it doesn't necessarily mean that God is trapped within the universe or outside of the universe. It's kind of the same way that, like, let's say let's say that we're interacting. Let's say there's a two-dimensional universe that we find. Well, I could put one finger in one place in the two-dimensional universe and another finger in another place in the two-dimensional universe, right? And I could do, and if you're within that two-dimensional universe, you'd be like, whoa, how is this possible? How can you have like two different fingers in two different places that are totally disconnected from each other? It's just so the issue is if you're at a higher dimensional plane interacting with our universe, you can interact with our universe in ways that are both within the universe and still breaking
Yes,
what seem to be
flat,
like the inherent laws of the universe. Yeah, exactly.
flatland sort of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah,
flatland sort of thing. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And by the way, omnitemporal, I've heard atemporal. And then some apologists will say God is outside time and space, and I'm like, well, great. Now you've made God not exist at all. So having it be every time at least allows it to have time to work inside of. So
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's more sensible than saying God is outside of time. It's like, what do you mean? It doesn't have a when to do stuff.
I've had this conversation with a lot of Christians, and I'm like, don't you think God has to be omnitemporal? And for some reason, people really don't like that,
They want
because
him outside of time space. I don't know. It's weird.
well, if God is ubiquitous, if God is omnipresent, and there's Minkowski space time, then doesn't God have to be omnitemporal? That's my argument, But,
Well, I mean,
and
if
maybe
you
a
want
minor
to put
point,
it,
but
mine would just be if you put him outside time space, he doesn't exist anywhere or when, which is fine by me. I'm like, all right, cool. All right.
Okay.
Is there any difference if God exists or not? And that is to get my attention. But yeah, well, is there a difference to us if God exists or not? In your view?
I mean, I don't. I think the question is a good one, in terms of like, would you be a different moral actor if you woke up, like, let's say I wake up tomorrow and I say there's no God, would I be less moral than if there is a God, right? And I would like to think that I would not be any more or any less moral if I find out one way or another. But having said that, I mean, I've done some stuff that I'm not proud of. I used to, when I was young, I was very poor. I would steal candy bars and I would steal sandwiches and stuff. And that's not right. I mean, and it's not moral. I don't know that I would. I mean, I think that's the main question, though. I will say that there's a lot of literature that addresses the issue of moral self-licensing. So, in other words, if you say, I am my own barometer of morality and I'm a pretty good person, then we know that attitude does decrease moral behavior. So, and the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of the conversations are sort of like that I have are sort of like, well, I'm a nice guy, why do I need God? And my point is when you give yourself that moral self-licensure, we do at least have empirical data that suggests that you will be less moral. Now, there's another sort of dimension of this other than moral behavior, and that dimension is, what does it really tell us about the universe if there is a God or there isn't? I think that's a harder question to answer. I think these things are interesting to discuss as thought experiments. I think as we gain more insight into the universe, the question of God sort of drops out of the observations that we have about the universe. Not necessarily, but sometimes they do. And so, I think it's in some ways an academic and intellectual question. It's at least for me interesting to talk about, and it reflects at least an interesting reflection on what our purpose is as human beings and what our relationship is to the cosmos.
All right. So Mighty Filbert follows that up with, wait a minute. That's how he said it too, by the way. Wait a minute. Are you saying that without God, there's no accountability? This is how Mighty Filbert sounds. Not really, but
So there's a common argument that apologists will make towards atheists that saying that basically you can't have morality if you don't believe in God. And I definitely wouldn't want to go that far. I think that argument is not a great argument to have, because you're essentially saying if you don't believe in what I believe, you're a less moral person. So I definitely wouldn't go that far. So there are systems of accountability, But we do know that if you live in a universe that is entirely defined by your own moral rules, then that currently in our current society, in our current culture, that does potentiate worse behavior. Now, I will say this: I don't think we do a very good job of teaching people morality independently. As an atheist, I was kind of a bit more of a moral emotivist. So I don't know if that really changes anyone's view of that, but I think we could do a much better job of interacting with kids and children, saying, you know, um, this is why you should be moral. I think kids should be reading Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative from a very early age. But
yeah, I don't even, we didn't talk about ethics or morals in school. Then again, I don't remember most of the stuff we did talk about in school. So how would I know? I think that's all we're gonna milk out of my chat because they like talking to each other. So, but maybe they'll leave a comment, or
maybe one of them could comment on what kind of nut is a filbert, because I said it's a walnut, and that's with with an F, not a PH.
I already looked up what filbert was when I talked to him before. So you can just watch my video on that. So okay. Gotta bring it back to me. It's all about me. Anyways,
yeah, it is. Yes.
All right. So that's typical with Deconverted Man. I ate most of the time, and I have no one to blame. That's all right. Yeah, see, you should have picked an interview. So this is actually your fault. It's not my fault. Yeah, that's it. Should have picked an interview. This is your fault. People try to put us down. You know what I'm saying? I just try to get around. They look awful cold though. And sometimes they might hope that they die before they get old. But it's my generation, baby. You know what I'm saying, right? You know what I'm talking about.
The Who.
Yeah, right. And of course.
Yes.
Right, yeah. Did you hear about the guy that they said that there was somebody possessed by an owl around here?
I'm not falling for it, but but I know where you're going.
Yeah, you have to say who.
Who?
It's you. Yeah. Oh, you're the ghost. Oh my God.
I was going to ask you as the next question. Were you offended when they said you sound like an owl? Did that bother you?
No, not at all.
See, you're too smart for me.
Oh, okay. Okay. Or I didn't, or I'm too stupid to get it. I don't know. Either way. Well, Tavo, it's been a talk, and we didn't get to your points, but we'll do part 2 at some point, maybe. I don't know what's going on. And until then, let you say something, and then stick around a bit after I hit the button. Go ahead.
Okay. No, there's super thanks so much for having me on your channel. You've got a super entertaining channel, and it was a very entertaining conversation. And maybe I'll
did I mention lobsters? Oh, damn it! Oh yeah, you did. Okay. I interrupted you. You're supposed to get the last word. I'm horrible.
Yeah. The last thing I would say is I did make a video about the theological implications of simulation theory, and so I'll send you that in case people want to see more about that, and you put it in your description. But thanks so much for having me on. You've got a fantastic channel. Check out your video. Check out your channel, everybody, and check out your video with Shang Sai. I thought that was a great video in particular. There's lots of great stuff on your channel. And
check out your stuff. You got all these thumbnails that look kind of like you're trying to be professional. And it's like, you're trying to be a YouTuber. I see what you're doing. Meanwhile, I'm not. I'm doing the opposite. I'm anti-YouTuber. No, I don't have thumbnails. I don't know what I'm doing over here.
No, you're as long as you're not trying to play bass, I think that's fine.
Oh, wait, what?
Thumbnails? Because you slap and pop on the bass. No, sorry, that was terrible.
No, I don't. No, you lost.
I'll leave the humor up to you in the future.
You're fired. All right. Okay. These are your final words, not your final words. So your final words here for now. Until next time, when you'll have other final words, go ahead. This time I will not interrupt for sure, and then I'll hit the button.
No, it's been great to be on here. I'm super grateful. Thanks, everybody, and please, all of you, have a really wonderful day.
All right.